In this video, we're going to introduce the idea of published and unpublished concerts and hide unpublished concerts from visitors to the site. So right now we have this test that allows a user to view a concert listing, right? So we add the concert, we view the concert, and then we make sure that we can see the concert details. So let's get rid of some of these comments and clean this up a little bit. So if we want to add a new test to prevent people from being able to view unpublished concerts, what would that look like? So let's add a new test down here, and we'll call this user cannot view unpublished concert listings. And now we need to figure out what the three phases of this test are. So for our arrange step, we're going to need to add a concert similar to what we did in this test. Our act step, we're going to visit that concert page. And then our assert step, we're just going to make sure that we actually can't see the page, that we can't access the concert. So what does it look like to create a concert in this case? Well, in this test, we're using just the Eloquent model's create method directly to specify all the information. But if you remember in our concert test, we were using Laravel's factory functionality to only have to provide the information that we actually care about. So let's leverage that here. So we're going to do concert equals factory concert class create. And now we have to decide what it means for a concert to be unpublished. What does that look like in terms of data in the database for that concert? Well, one way that we could do it would be to add a published flag. So we could do something like published true for a concert that's published, or published false for a concert that's not published. This approach works okay, but what I prefer to do in these situations actually is to use a timestamp, a nullable timestamp. It gives you a little bit more flexibility down the road. So instead of doing published true or false, let's do published at, and we'll set it to null. So this concert hasn't been published yet. And when a concert is published, we'll just track the timestamp that it was published at, so we know when someone actually published that concert. Now for our act step, we can just copy what we have here, honestly. It's going to be the same thing. We're just going to visit that concert. But for our assert step, we want to make sure that we get a 404. We don't want to be able to actually view this concert page. So how can we do that? Well, Laravel provides a helper out of the box called assert response status. And you can pass this status code and make sure that the response that came back matches that status code. And this lives inside this big makes HTTP requests trait that gets mixed into our base test case. So a little workflow tip, when I'm looking for assertions to use, I'll often jump into this trait and pull it up in the sidebar so I can see a couple of the other traits that are available inside your test case, and just use Sublime's kind of method browsing to poke around and see if I can find something that looks like it's going to do what I need. So we're going to use this assert response status helper to make sure that we get back a 404. So if we say assert response status 404, now we should be able to run this test and see what our error is. So let's just run that one test. And we get an error that the concerts table has no column published at. So we can use this information to go and update our migration. So if we had already deployed this application, we could create a new migration to add this column. But since we're still in development, the easiest thing to do is just update the existing migration. So let's just add a new column here, and we'll make it a datetime column called published at. And we know we want it to be nullable, but I'm not going to add that yet. I'm going to let the tests drive that out for us. So let's run this test again. And now we get an error that a not null constraint failed because the database doesn't know that we want this to be a nullable column yet. So we can go back to our migration and make this nullable. Now if we run our test again, now we get an error that we were expecting a 404, but we got a 200. Okay, so now we can actually go and implement the logic to make sure that we get a 404 if the concert has not been published yet. So let's dive into our concerts controller. And here where we're actually trying to find the concert, what we need to do is make sure we're only looking for concerts that are also not published. So the quickest way to do this is to add a query scope here where we say where not null published at, and then chain find off of that. So this is only going to look for that ID in the group of concerts that have a published at date set. So if we go and run the tests again, hopefully we see a different error or maybe a passing test. Okay, so it failed again, but why did it fail this time? Let's check it out. So up here, you can see that the request to concerts 1 failed because we got a 500 back. And the reason for the 500 was that we were trying to get a property of a non-object in the view. So what's happening here is that in our controller, this find method, if we check to see what's coming back here, let's just dump this concert and check it out on the test. The concert is coming back as null because there are no concerts that are published, right? Because we're just running this one test. So this is coming back as null. We're passing null to the view, and then we're trying to access a bunch of properties on null, which is obviously going to blow up. So what's the easiest way to get Laravel to return a 404 page if it can't find this? Well, if we use the find or fail method, this will throw a model not found exception. And by default, the Laravel exception handler is set up to catch model not found exceptions and turn them into 404 responses for us. So if we go back and run our test again, we can see now we get a different error. And this one is kind of confusing. It's saying a request to localhost concerts1 failed because it got a 404 back. What? That's kind of confusing. We know we got a 404 back. Our goal was to get a 404 back, right? That's what we were trying to assert. Now, the reason for this is that this visit helper is trying to be a little clever under the hood. It's trying to be smart about following redirects so that you can get all the way from, one endpoint to whatever endpoint it ends up redirecting to when you need to make this sort of assertion. And now, if at any point in that redirect chain, it fails because something messed up, it throws an exception to try and help you debug that so that it's easier for you to figure out what's going wrong. Unfortunately for us, that doesn't really help because we actually do want to get a 404 back. So what's the best solution here? Well, my rule of thumb is to use visit for happy path cases where I actually want something to succeed and I want to make assertions about the page. But when I want to make assertions about failures or where I want to make assertions about the content of the HTTP response itself, a better approach is often to use the actual HTTP verb helpers. So we can do something like this get, for example, just to make a get request there, and then we just get back the raw HTTP response, and Laravel doesn't try and do anything fancy. You can do the same thing with post or patch or put, that sort of thing. In this case, get is what we need. So if we make a get request there, then we're going to get a response back that we can make assertions about. So let's run this test again. And now we have a passing test. However, if we run all the tests in this file, we can see that now the first test fails. So in the next video, we're going to look at getting that first test passing again, doing a little bit of refactoring in our concerts controller, and introducing another feature of Laravel's model factories that'll help us clean up this test a little bit.